Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of the brutal Soviet winter 1959. We're in the remote Ural Mountains. A group of 9 really experienced ski hikers sets off on this incredible journey. I mean, these folks were young, they were tough, totally prepared for the wilderness. But this trip into the heart of Soviet Russia, it was going to be their last. They thought they were just climbing a mountain, but what they actually walked into was a mystery that, honestly, still gives me chills.
So weeks go by, they're way overdue. A search party finally finds their camp. And what they discover is just deeply unsettling. Their tent, it's ripped up, half buried in snow. And get this, it's on the side of a mountain the locals call Dead Mountain. Not a great sign, right? But inside the tent, that's where it gets even stranger. All their stuff, their warm clothes, their food, even their shoes, just left behind in the freezing cold. Who does that?
And right away, we get the first, truly bizarre clue. You see, the hikers didn't just unzip their tent to get out. No, they slashed it open from the inside. Think about that for a second. Their only shelter from the brutal cold, and they violently cut their way out? This one single act of pure desperation, well, it kicks off the central question that's haunted this whole case ever since.
So here it is. This is the big one. The question that has obsessed everyone from Soviet investigators to modern-day internet sleuths for over 60 years. What on earth could have happened out there that was so terrifying, so absolutely horrifying, that 9 experienced hikers decided it was better to flee into the sub-zero wilderness without shoes or coats than to stay in their tent? What is scarier than freezing to death?
All right, Section 1, a chilling discovery. Let's really dig into what those first rescuers found at the scene. Because at first, it seemed to tell one kind of story, but it was actually hiding something much, much darker.
Okay, so the investigators start following these footprints leading away from the tent. And get this, some of the prints are just socks, some are completely barefoot, in the snow. They follow this tragic trail for about 1.5 kilometers, all the way down to the tree line. And there, under a big cedar tree, they find the first 2 bodies. They're dressed only in their underwear. A bit further up, they find 3 more, including the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. The way they were positioned, it looked like they were desperately trying to crawl back to the tent. Just a heartbreaking, tragic scene.
So, the first 5 bodies are recovered, and the autopsies come in. And honestly, it looks like a pretty open and shut case, as tragic as it is. The official cause of death for all of them, hypothermia. They just froze to death. Now, yeah, there were a few weird things. Some bruised knuckles, an odd bruise here, a small non-fatal crack in one guy's skull, but nothing that could have killed them. It seemed like a straightforward, if heartbreaking, accident. For a little while, at least, it felt like the mystery was solved.
But remember, there were still 4 hikers missing. The search went on, and then, 2 months later, in May, the snows finally started to melt, and that's when they were found. Let me tell you, this discovery, it didn't just change the story. It blew the whole thing wide open.
So let's get into Section 2, the baffling evidence. Because what they found with this second group of hikers wasn't just confusing, it flew in the face of everything they thought had happened.
So these last 4 bodies, they're found deep in a ravine, under 4 meters of snow. And the injuries? There's something else entirely. One of the women, Lyudmila Dubina, her autopsy report is just horrifying. It reads like she was in a car crash. Her ribs weren't just broken, they were crushed, symmetrically on both sides of her body. I mean, ribs 2 through 5 on the right, 2 through 7 on the left, just completely shattered.
And then there was another hiker, Nikolai Thibault-Brunel. He had this massive, completely fatal skull fracture. The medical examiner said that the force needed to cause these kinds of injuries was immense. Like, picture the force of being hit by a car. But, and this is the part that makes no sense, none of these bodies had any major external wounds. No big cuts, no deep bruises. It was all devastating, crushing force on the inside. How is that even possible? So let's just pause and look at this. You've got the first group who died from hypothermia with pretty minor injuries. And then you have the second group who died from massive internal trauma.
crushed ribs, fractured skulls, caused by some incredible force that left no marks on their skin. You have to ask yourself, how could one event on one night lead to two totally different ways of dying? It just doesn't add up. And if you thought it couldn't get any weirder, you'd be wrong. Because on top of the injuries, there were these final, bizarre clues. Ludmila Dubinina, she was found missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Another hiker was missing his eyeballs. Oh, and some of their clothes had traces of radiation on them. So, what do you do with all that? Faced with this impossible puzzle, the 1959 Soviet investigation just threw up its hands and closed the case, concluding that the hikers died from an, and I quote, unknown compelling force. Talk about cryptic.
Okay, Section 3, Competing Explanations. You can imagine a conclusion like, an unknown compelling force just left this giant vacuum, and for decades people have rushed to fill it with theories, everything from the scientific to the, well, downright conspiratorial. Let's dive into the main ones, starting with the one that Russian officials are pushing today.
All right, so here's the modern official theory, which came out in 2020. They're saying it was a slab avalanche. The idea is that a big, solid plate of snow slid down, hit the tent while they were sleeping, caused those horrific internal injuries on some of them, and sent the whole group into a panic. So they cut their way out and fled downhill into the cold, where the rest of the tragedy unfolded. But a lot of people aren't buying it. For starters, the original search party back in '59 saw no signs of an avalanche. And these weren't amateur campers. Dyatlov was an experienced leader who would know not to set up camp in a dangerous spot. But maybe the biggest problem with this theory? Their skis and hiking poles were found stuck in the snow, standing upright, right next to the tent. How does that happen if a giant slab of snow just came crashing through? For a lot of people, the evidence at the scene just doesn't fit the story.
So if not an avalanche, what else could it be? Well, there are a couple of cool, if a bit spooky, scientific theories. One is something called a katabatic wind, which is basically a sudden, super violent rush of cold air down the mountainside. It could have sounded and felt like the tent was being torn apart. Then there's the idea of infrasound. This is a low-frequency sound, totally inaudible to us, that can be created by wind whipping over a mountain. And here's the wild part. It's been shown to cause feelings of panic, anxiety, and just pure terror in humans. Could that be what made them run? And of course, you can't talk about Dyatlov Pass without talking about a military cover-up. I mean, remember, this is 1959, the height of the Cold War. A lot of people believe the hikers just saw something they weren't supposed to see, maybe a secret weapons test. And there's some stuff to back this up. Another group of hikers nearby reported seeing weird orange spheres in the sky that very night. Then you've got the radiation on the clothes, and the fact that the military seemed to be all over this investigation from day one. It definitely makes you wonder. So that brings us to our final section, an unsettled mystery. Because even though there's an official explanation now, this case is still this huge cultural obsession. It's one of those stories where every potential answer just seems to bring up 5 new questions. For so many people, this thing is nowhere near solved.
And this timeline really puts it all in perspective. You see the events unfold in early 1959. The trek starting, the night they died, the tent being found, and then the final bodies in May. But then look at that huge gap. The investigation is closed with that bizarre, compelling natural force line, and then 61 years of silence. 61 years of questions before we get the new and, yeah, pretty controversial avalanche conclusion in 2020.
And this chart, this really gets to the heart of the whole problem. You can see it right here. 2/3 of the group died from hypothermia. The other third, massive, violent trauma. That's the puzzle. Any theory, whether it's an avalanche or a weapon or something else entirely, has to explain how both of those things happened to the same group of people on the same night. And so far, nothing seems to fit perfectly.
And you know, with all the theories and the mystery, it's so important to remember the actual people at the center of this. 9 young people who are out on an adventure. The pass where this all happened is now officially named after their leader, Igor Dyatlov. It's forever their story.
So what do you think? Was it a rare, strange type of avalanche, like the officials say? Does that really explain everything we've talked about? Or did they stumble onto a military accident? Maybe it was some bizarre natural phenomenon, something we haven't even discovered yet. What's your theory? Those footprints in the snow are long, long gone. But the questions they left behind, they feel like they're frozen in time. What really happened on Dead Mountain is a story that has plenty of theories, but to this day, no real answers. More than 60 years later, the pass is still holding on to its secrets.